Have you ever read Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky?
No, I haven't.
I have. Yeah. A lot of things you don't know about me, too, Miss Novak, people seldom go to the trouble of scratching the surface of things to find the inward truth.
Really, Mr. Martin, I wouldn't care at all to scratch your surface. Probably because I know exactly what I'd find. A handbag instead of a heart, a suitcase instead of a soul, instead of an intellect, a cigarette lighter that doesn't work.
Yeah, that's very well put. I think comparing my intellect with a cigarette lighter that doesn't work, that's a very interesting mixture of poetry and meanness.
Meanness?
Oh, don't understand me, Miss Novak.
I thought I told you I was expecting somebody.
Listen, if your party doesn't show up, would I...
Don't worry about that, Mr. Martin. This party will show up. It's really not necessary for you to entertain me.
Well, let me tell you something, Miss Novak. You may have beautiful thoughts, but you certainly hide them. And as far as your actions are concerned, you're cold and snippy like an old maid, and you're going to have a terrible time finding a man to fall in love with you.
An old maid? So, no man will fall in love with me. Really, Mr. Martin, you're getting funnier every minute. Why, I could show you letters that would open your eyes. No, maybe not. You probably wouldn't understand what's in them. They're written by a type of man so far above you that it's ridiculous. I have to laugh when I think of you calling me an old maid. You little insignificant clerk.
So ends Act One of our first Gulf production of the season. During the brief moment before the curtain rises on Act Two, I'd like to tell you some of the many things in store for you here in the Gulf Theater. Next week, for instance, you'll meet Clark Gable, Ann Sothern, and Jeffrey Lynn in the great motion picture success Red Dust. The following week, the pair you've all been waiting for, Vivian Leigh and Laurence Olivier, in Private Lives. In future weeks, among others, you'll hear from Jack Benny, Claudette Colbert, Ernst Lubitsch, Basil Rathbone, James Cagney, Mickey Rooney, and Judy Garland. And now we return to the second chapter of our story, The Shop Around the Corner, starring Margaret Sullavan, James Stewart, Frank Morgan, Oscar Bradley's music with Frank Tours conducting.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Pryor. I'll take over from here. It was a terrible blow to Martin when he looked in the window of the cafe and discovered the unknown girl he'd been writing to for so many weeks was none other than his fellow clerk, Clara. But it was more of a blow to Clara when, after Martin left, she waited 2 hours and her dream prince didn't show up. She took it hard, poor child. You know how girls are, especially the dreamer type like Clara. Why, I once knew a girl before I was married Yes, well, that's another story. Another program. Clara, as I say, took it very hard. She even stayed home from work. She was so upset. Martin felt pretty bad about this, so he decided he ought to call on her, strictly in the line of duty, of course. Incidentally, whenever you hear that particular rapping on that particular door, ladies and gentlemen, that means Mr. Martin is calling on Miss Novak.
Good evening, Miss Novak.
Oh, good evening, Mr. Martin. Come in.
How are you, young lady?
I'm all right, Mr. Martin. Sorry I couldn't come to work.
Oh, that's all right. Now, you must take care of yourself.
I'm sure I'll be all right in a day or two.
But that doesn't mean that you should neglect yourself. Now, you see, I feel pretty responsible for the whole thing.
You? Oh, no, Mr. Martin. Oh, no, I think I can relieve your mind. It wasn't your fault at all. No, there's a much bigger reason, unfortunately. A psychological reason. But it's my personal problem, and I'll come out of it. It's just one of those things.
Oh, I'm very sorry. It's really a shame that you have to go through all this. But, of course, so long as it's only psychological.
Only psychological. Mr. Martin, it's true. We're in the same room, but we are not in the same planet.
Miss Novak, Although I'm the victim of your remark, I must admire your exquisite way of expressing yourself. You certainly know how to put a man in his planet.
Yes, come in.
Dear Clara, a special delivery letter has just come for you.
Oh, really? Thank you, Aunt Anna.
I hope it's good news.
Well, Mr. Martin, it certainly was kind of you to drop in, but I don't want to spoil your evening.
Oh, no, it's lots of time. You go right ahead with your letter. Don't pay no attention to me. It's
Yeah, well, if you don't mind.
Well, it's good news.
Wonderful news, Mr. Martin. You know, if I weren't feeling so wonderful right now, I could be very mad with you.
With me? Why?
Why? Because you really spoiled my date the other night. I wasn't so wrong when I asked you not to sit down at my table. You see, this gentleman did come to the cafe. He looked in the window, saw us together, and he misunderstood.
Oh, you mean he thought you and I were friends?
Yeah, he must have. Listen to what he writes. Tell me, who is this very attractive young man? He's just the type women fall for.
Sorry I caused you so much trouble.
I'll straighten it out. Let him be a little jealous. We'll hurt him.
Doesn't seem to be much of a man, this friend of yours. He walks away. He's afraid to come over to the table because another man's sitting there.
Martin, he was not afraid, I can assure you. He's tactful. He's sensitive. He's not the kind of a man who would sit at a table uninvited. It's difficult to explain a man like him to a man like you. Where you would say black, he would say white. Where you would say ugly, he says beautiful. And where you would say old maid, he says, listen, here, eyes that sparkle with fire and mystery. Vivacious. Fascinating. He says I make him think of gypsy music.
Well, I suppose there's nothing left for me to say except that I wish you a very Merry Christmas, both of you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Well, good night, Miss Novak.
Good night, Mr. Martin.